Your Honor, that first and only warning is cute. Call my father. He can buy this entire case before you finish that sentence.
What happens when a billionaire heiress walks into Judge Boyd's courtroom, convinced that her father's bank account can buy the law, publicly laughs at the judge's warning, and then discovers evidence so destructive it could wipe out her family's entire empire? If you think you know how this ends, think again. Drop a comment right now telling us what you would do if you were in Judge Boyd's position when faced with this level of blatant disrespect. Because what unfolds in this courtroom today will leave you speechless. On May 14th, 2024, the municipal court witnessed a display of entitlement unlike anything seen before. Hit that subscribe button if you despise those who think they are above the law, because this story is about to validate every frustration you've ever felt. The defendant's name was Alexandra Lexi Sterling, a 24-year-old sole heiress to the Sterling pharmaceutical empire, a corporation worth billions. She didn't arrive at court in a police cruiser, but in a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom, stepping out in an $8,000 Versace dress and wearing Balenciaga sunglasses that covered half her face. Like this video if you believe justice should be blind to wealth, because that is exactly the brutal lesson Judge Boyd was about to teach her. Lexi wasn't in court for a minor traffic violation. She was facing serious charges: second-degree assault, destruction of public property, and resisting arrest. But what made this case different from every other docket that crossed Judge Boyd's bench was the defendant's attitude. Share this with someone who needs to see that karma is real. To understand why Lexi Sterling stood before the court with a smirk on her face, we have to go back to the fateful night of March 2nd, 2024. The setting was the Golden Spoon, a historic family diner serving the working class. Arthur Miller, a 72-year-old veteran and the owner, was cleaning the register. Arthur had spent his life building this diner, every brick and every table representing his blood, sweat, and tears. Around 11 p.m., Lexi Sterling and her group of high society friends burst in. They had just left a VIP nightclub and were visibly intoxicated. Lexi demanded Arthur serve a vintage wine that wasn't even on the menu. When the old veteran gently explained that this was just a casual diner, Lexi flew into a rage. The security cameras captured everything. She threw a glass of water into Arthur's face, flipped over tables, and screamed, "Do you know who I am? I could buy this rat hole and turn it into a parking lot for my dogs with one phone call." It didn't stop there. When the police arrived, Lexi live-streamed the entire arrest to her 5 million Instagram followers, laughing and calling the officers poor clowns. But Lexi made a fatal mistake. She didn't know that her case file had landed on the desk of Judge Boyd, the man known as the nightmare of the elite. Unlike judges who often go easy on celebrities, Judge Boyd was famous for a gaze that could pierce the soul and sentences that offered no mercy. Back in the courtroom, Lexi stood there, scrolling through her phone, popping gum, completely ignoring Judge Boyd as he entered. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. Judge Boyd sat down, but he didn't open the file immediately. He removed his glasses and stared at Lexi with eyes cold as ice for 30 agonizing seconds. "Miss Sterling," Judge Boyd's deep voice echoed through the silence, breaking the tension. "This is a court of law, not a fan meet and greet. Put the phone away and spit the gum out. This is my first and only warning." And that was when it happened. Lexi Sterling looked up and smirked, a smile full of contempt. She turned to her private attorney, whispering loud enough for the microphone to pick up, "Who does this old man think he is? Funny." Then she laughed out loud, a shrill, piercing laugh that echoed through the solemn courtroom. The entire room held its breath. Lexi's lawyer, a powerful man named Marcus Blackwood, went pale, frantically signaling his client to shut up. But it was too late. Judge Boyd didn't bang his gavel. He didn't yell. He simply smiled, a smile so cold it sent shivers down everyone's spine. "You find this funny, Miss Sterling?" he asked softly. "Fair enough. Let's see if you're still laughing after I show you this." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the suffocating silence of a storm about to break. Judge Boyd didn't look at the legal papers in front of him. He signaled to the bailiff, and the large high-definition screens mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. Lexi Sterling sighed loudly, rolling her eyes with exaggerated boredom. She whispered to her lawyer, Is he seriously going to show the security footage again? We've all seen it. I threw a glass of water. Big deal. My dad will pay for the dry cleaning. She leaned back, checking her nails, expecting the grainy black and white video from the diner. But Judge Boyd wasn't playing the diner's security tape. On the screen, a vertical video appeared. It was high quality, stabilized, and clearly filmed on a smartphone. The angle was selfie style. It was Lexi, but this wasn't the footage the public had seen. This wasn't the live stream she had posted. This was a video from her close friend's story, a video she had deleted 3 minutes after posting it, a video she thought was gone forever. The audio boomed through the courtroom speakers. It was Lexi's voice, slurred but distinct, filmed inside the back of her Rolls-Royce just moments before she entered the diner. "Okay, guys," the digital Lexi said, laughing into the camera, holding a bottle of champagne. "So, we're pulling up to this sad little diner right now. My dad just told me I need to humble myself because of the PR disaster last week. So, watch this. I'm going to walk in there, find the oldest, saddest employee, and make his life a living hell. We're going to see how much it takes to make a peasant cry. Bet I can get him to beg for his job. Watch this space." The video cut to a second clip. This one was filmed after the incident from the back of the police cruiser. Lexi was filming the officers in the front seat. "Look at these losers," she sneered at the camera. "They actually think I'm going to jail. My dad plays golf with the district attorney. I'll be out in an hour. And that old man at the diner, I'm going to buy his building and evict him just for fun. Content gold, baby." The screen went black. In the courtroom, you could hear a pin drop. The smirk that had been plastered on Lexi Sterling's face for the last hour didn't just fade, it evaporated. The color drained from her skin, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She gripped the edge of the defense table, her knuckles turning white. For the first time since she walked in, she looked terrified. Her lawyer, Marcus Blackwood, closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He knew, in that instant, that his entire defense strategy claiming Lexi was under emotional distress and didn't mean to cause harm had just been incinerated. Judge Boyd leaned forward, his hands clasped together. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was surgical, cutting through the thick atmosphere like a scalpel. "Miss Sterling," Judge Boyd said, his eyes locking onto hers, "you told your lawyer that the incident was an unfortunate accident caused by intoxication. You claimed you had no memory of the event. Yet, that video proves premeditation. It proves malice. It proves that you didn't just lose your temper. You planned to destroy an elderly man's dignity for content." Lexi tried to speak, her voice trembling. That was just a joke. It was just internet talk. I didn't mean it." "A joke?" Judge Boyd interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously low. "Arthur Miller is a Vietnam veteran. He has shrapnel in his leg from defending the very freedom that allows you to drive your Rolls-Royce and post your videos. When you threw that glass, you cut his cornea. He has lost 40% of the vision in his left eye. Is that part of the joke, Miss Sterling? Is partial blindness content gold?" Lexi shrank back into her chair. The defiance was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a child who realizes the adults aren't playing anymore. "You thought deleting that video made it disappear," Judge Boyd continued, picking up a document. "But you forgot one thing. The internet is written in ink, Miss Sterling, not pencil. And when you mess with the wrong people, the digital footprint you leave behind becomes the map to your downfall. But that video, that's just the appetizer." Judge Boyd opened the thick file on his desk. He pulled out a single, crisp sheet of paper. "Because while my team was recovering your deleted videos, we found something else on your phone, something that connects you and your father's company to a scheme far bigger and far darker than a diner brawl." Judge Boyd looked at the court reporter. "Let the record show that what I am about to read is Exhibit B. And Miss Sterling, if I were you, I would call your father, right now. Because after I read this, his money won't be able to save either of you. Exhibit B," Judge Boyd announced, holding the paper up to the light, "is a transcript of a text message exchange recovered from your cloud account. It took place at 11:42 p.m. on the night of your arrest. That is exactly 12 minutes after you live streamed yourself insulting the police officers. Marcus Blackwood, the high-priced defense attorney, shot up from his chair. Objection, Your Honor. This is a violation of privacy. These are private communications between a daughter and her father. They are privileged. Sit down, Mr. Blackwood, Judge Boyd commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. You know as well as I do that the attorney-client privilege does not extend to co-conspirators in a crime, and you certainly don't have privilege over a conversation discussing the commission of a felony. If you interrupt me again, I will have the bailiff remove you, and you can defend Miss Sterling from the hallway. Blackwood sank back into his seat, wiping sweat from his forehead. He knew what was coming. Lexi Sterling, however, looked confused. She didn't remember texting her father anything illegal. She just remembered complaining. Judge Boyd began to read, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. Sent by Lexi Sterling to Daddy at 11:42 p.m. These cops are annoying. They actually put handcuffs on me. Get Blackwood to fix this. I don't want a record. Judge Boyd looked over his glasses at Lexi. A spoiled complaint. Expected. But it is the response from your father, Mr. Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Pharmaceuticals, that shifts this case from a misdemeanor assault to a federal conspiracy. He continued reading. Response from Richard Sterling at 11:44 p.m. Don't worry, Princess. Blackwood is handling it. We need you out by tomorrow morning. The transfer for the Project Horizon funds clears at 9 a.m. We need your signature on the shell company accounts to wash the $50 million before the audit starts. Just keep your mouth shut and don't antagonize the judge. We'll buy him off like we did the last one. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The reporters in the back row began furiously typing on their laptops. Lexi Sterling's mouth fell open. She stared at the judge, then at her lawyer, her eyes wide with disbelief. Did you hear that, Miss Sterling? Judge Boyd asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Your father didn't just admit to bribing a previous judge, a crime that will trigger an immediate investigation into every case your family has ever been involved in. He also explicitly mentioned Project Horizon and washing $50 million. Lexi started to shake. I don't know what that means. I just sign the papers he gives me. I'm just an influencer. Ignorance is not a defense when your signature is on the laundering documents, Judge Boyd countered. You just provided this court with written evidence of money laundering, bribery of a judicial official, and tax fraud. You thought you were just a rich girl throwing a tantrum in a diner, but in reality, you are the face of a massive criminal enterprise. Judge Boyd placed the paper down and leaned forward. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. You laughed at my warning, Miss Sterling, because you thought your father's money made you untouchable. You thought this was a game. But that text message proves that your entire lifestyle, the Rolls-Royce, the Versace dresses, the arrogance, is funded by dirty money that your father is desperately trying to hide. Lexi turned to her lawyer, panic rising in her voice. Marcus, do something. You said they couldn't read my texts. You said the cloud was secure. Shut up, Lexi, Blackwood hissed, no longer caring about courtroom decorum. He was watching the doors at the back of the room. Judge Boyd noticed the lawyer's glance. Mr. Blackwood seems to know what time it is, the judge said with a grim smile. You see, Miss Sterling, when I received this evidence this morning, I didn't just add it to your file. I made a phone call. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. The sound of heavy boots marching on the marble floor echoed through the room. 4 agents in windbreakers emblazoned with 3 bright yellow letters entered the courtroom. FBI. They weren't walking toward the exit. They were walking straight toward the defense table. Alexandra Sterling, Judge Boyd said, his voice ringing out like a final judgment. This is no longer a municipal matter regarding a glass of water. This is a federal investigation. And since your father was kind enough to mention buying off judges, I am revoking your bail effective immediately. Lexi screamed as the agents approached. No, you can't do this. My dad will kill you. He'll destroy you. Your father, Judge Boyd said calmly, picking up his gavel, is currently a little busy. But don't worry, you'll see him soon. As the agents reached for Lexi's wrists to replace her diamond bracelets with steel handcuffs, Judge Boyd looked at the court officer. But before you take her away, there is one more person who needs to enter this courtroom. Someone Miss Sterling thinks she can just buy and evict. Judge Boyd pointed to the side door. Bring him in. The side door of the courtroom creaked open. The room, already charged with the tension of the FBI raid, fell into a respectful silence. Even the federal agents paused, their hands firm on Lexi Sterling's shoulders, allowing the moment to play out. Arthur Miller walked in. He didn't look like a man who had been assaulted and humiliated just weeks prior. He walked with a slight limp, a relic from his service overseas, but his back was ramrod straight. He wore a simple, pressed plaid shirt and his faded military fatigue jacket. But what caught everyone's attention was the thick, white medical gauze taped over his left eye, the physical receipt of Lexi Sterling's joke. Lexi, still struggling against the agents, stopped screaming when she saw him. For a split second, she looked confusingly at her lawyer, as if asking why the help was allowed in the VIP section. You said you wanted to buy his building, Judge Boyd said, his voice cutting through the air. You said you wanted to turn his life's work into a parking lot for your dogs. Well, Miss Sterling, he is standing right here. Tell him. Lexi sneered, her entitlement overriding her survival instinct. This is ridiculous. Look at him. I can write him a check right now to fix his eye and buy a new diner. Let me go, and I'll give him, I don't know, $2 million? Is that enough for you, old man? She spat the offer out like an insult, convinced that money was the universal language. She expected Arthur to gasp, to thank her, to tell the judge to let her go. Arthur Miller didn't blink with his good eye. He slowly walked toward the defense table, stopping just out of arm's reach. He looked at the girl in the $8,000 dress, then at the handcuffs, and finally up at Judge Boyd. Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice gravelly and worn, but steady. I don't want her money. I've had rich men try to buy me out for 30 years. They think because I serve coffee and eggs, I have a price tag. He turned back to Lexi. Young lady, in 1971, I sat in a jungle for 3 days with shrapnel in my leg, waiting for a medevac that I wasn't sure was coming. I fought for a country where anyone, even a diner cook, has the same rights as a billionaire's daughter. You think you're powerful because of your daddy's credit card? You're not powerful. You're weak. You throw tantrums and hide behind lawyers. That's not power. That's cowardice. Lexi's face turned crimson. Shut up. You're a nobody. My dad is Richard Sterling. He owns this city. Your dad, Judge Boyd interrupted, is currently the subject of a breaking news report. Bailiff, switch input to News Channel 4. The courtroom screens flickered again, changing from the text messages to a live news broadcast. The headline running across the bottom of the screen in bold red letters read, FBI raids Sterling Manor. The footage was being shot from a news helicopter. It showed the sprawling Sterling estate, a mansion that looked more like a palace, but the driveway wasn't filled with luxury cars. It was filled with armored FBI trucks. Agents were swarming the grounds, carrying out boxes of documents and computers, but the camera zoomed in on the front steps. There, being led out in zip ties, wearing a silk bathrobe and looking utterly defeated, was Richard Sterling, the man Lexi had claimed would kill the judge, the man who was supposed to fix everything. The news anchor's voice filled the courtroom. Breaking news. Pharmaceutical tycoon Richard Sterling has been taken into custody following a multi-year investigation into money laundering and fraud, codenamed Project Horizon. Authorities say the investigation was blown wide open this morning by new evidence obtained from a family member's digital device. Lexi stopped breathing. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was the family member. Her text messages, her deleted video. She hadn't just gotten herself arrested. She had accidentally handed the FBI the key to destroy her father. Marcus Blackwood, the lawyer, slowly started to pack his briefcase. He looked at Lexi with pure disgust. You idiot, he whispered, loud enough for the front row to hear. You just indicted your own father. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Boyd said, amused. Where are you going? We haven't discussed your role in the bribery of judicial officials mentioned in those texts yet. Blackwood froze. Agents, Judge Boyd nodded to the FBI team. The courtroom is yours. But before you take Miss Sterling to federal processing, I have one final piece of business to attend to regarding the assault on Mr. Miller. because while the feds want you for fraud, the state of this city still demands justice for the violence you committed. Lexi looked up, tears finally streaming down her face, not tears of sorrow, but tears of a trapped animal. Please, she whimpered, looking at Arthur. Please, just take the money. Tell them to stop. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Judge Boyd leaned back, his eyes hardening. Save your apologies for the federal indictment, Miss Sterling, because I'm not done with you yet. You see, there is a reason I brought Mr. Miller in here. It wasn't just to confront you. It was to verify the identity of the other person you threatened in that diner. Judge Boyd opened a new folder. Arthur Miller wasn't the only one you attacked that night, was he? There was a dishwasher in the back, a young man named Mateo. You told him you'd have him deported. Lexi sobbed, nodding weakly. I was drunk. I don't remember. Well, Judge Boyd said, Mateo remembers, and so does the immigration office, but not in the way you think. Judge Boyd signaled to the bailiff again. Bring in witness number 2. The second side door opened, and a young man stepped into the courtroom. He was wearing a sharp, pressed suit, but he walked with a disciplined cadence that suggested military training. He stopped next to Arthur Miller, offering the older veteran a respectful nod before turning his gaze to the sobbing heiress. State your name for the record, Judge Boyd commanded. Mateo Rodriguez, the young man said. His voice was calm, clear, and completely devoid of the fear Lexi remembered seeing in the diner kitchen. Lexi wiped her nose, looking confused. He's just the dishwasher. I saw him scrubbing pots. Why is he wearing a suit? You saw what you wanted to see, Miss Sterling, Judge Boyd interjected, opening a service record on his desk. You saw a Latino man in a kitchen and assumed he was undocumented. You assumed he was powerless. You screamed at him that you would, and I quote from the police report, call ICE and have him shipped back to wherever he came from. Judge Boyd paused, letting the ugliness of her words hang in the air. But here is the reality check you desperately need. Mr. Rodriguez was indeed working in the kitchen that night. He works 2 jobs to pay for his tuition, but during the day, he isn't just a student. He is Lance Corporal Rodriguez of the United States Marine Corps Reserve. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery. Lexi's jaw dropped. Judge Boyd continued, his voice rising with controlled intensity. While you were live streaming yourself opening bottles of champagne in a nightclub, this young man was training to defend this country. While you were threatening to deport him, he was preparing for deployment. You threatened a serviceman of the United States Armed Forces with deportation based solely on his ethnicity. Judge Boyd leaned over the bench, staring straight into Lexi's soul. That creates a special legal problem for you, Miss Sterling, because in this state, targeting a victim based on their race or national origin elevates a simple assault charge to a hate crime felony. And unlike your father's money, federal hate crime statutes do not have a price tag. Lexi looked at her lawyer, desperation clawing at her throat. Marcus, say something. Tell them I didn't mean it. I have friends who are diverse. I can't be a hate criminal. Marcus Blackwood didn't answer. He was currently busy trying to text someone under the table, his hands shaking noticeably. Mr. Blackwood is a little preoccupied, Judge Boyd noted dryly. He's likely realizing that since he was the one who facilitated the fix for your previous legal issues mentioned in those texts, he is now what the FBI calls a person of interest. But we'll get to him in a moment. Judge Boyd turned his attention back to Mateo. Lance Corporal, do you have anything you wish to say to the defendant before I pass judgment on the state charges? Mateo stepped forward. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He looked at Lexi with a pity that hurt worse than anger. I don't hate you, Miss Sterling, Mateo said softly. I feel sorry for you. My parents came here with nothing. They worked cleaning floors so I could wear this uniform. We built something real. You have everything, and yet you are empty. You have millions of dollars, but you possess zero honor. That night in the kitchen, when you spit on me, I didn't wipe it off because I was scared. I wiped it off because I refused to let your hate stain my uniform. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, she told me I didn't belong in this country. I would like the court to remind her who actually belongs here. The people who build it or the people who just take from it. Well said, Judge Boyd nodded. And that brings us to the sentencing. Lexi panicked. Sentencing? Wait, we haven't even had a trial. I want a trial. I want a jury. You waived your right to a preliminary hearing when your lawyer filed for a summary dismissal this morning. Judge Boyd corrected her, a shark-like grin appearing. And based on the overwhelming evidence presented, the video you filmed yourself, the confession in your texts, and the witness testimony, I am issuing a summary judgment on the bail conditions and the probation violation from your previous DUI, which you conveniently forgot to mention. Judge Boyd picked up his gavel. It felt heavier this time, more final. Alexandra Sterling, you stand before this court as a symbol of everything that is broken in our society. You believed that wealth was a shield. Today, that shield is shattered. The federal agents are here for the financial crimes, but before they take you, the state of New York is taking its pound of flesh. On the charge of violation of probation, I am revoking your suspended sentence. You are remanded to custody immediately to serve the remaining 11 months of your previous term. On the charges of assault and destruction of property, I am setting bail at. Actually, Judge Boyd paused, looking at the FBI agents waiting by the rail. Given the flight risk established by your father's private jet logs and the millions of dollars in offshore accounts you just admitted to accessing, I am remanding you without bail. Without bail? Lexi shrieked, lurching forward. The agents grabbed her arms tightly. You can't do that. I'm a Sterling. I don't go to jail. Marcus, do something. Marcus Blackwood finally stood up, but not to defend her. He stood up because two more agents had just entered the room and were pointing directly at him. Miss Sterling, Judge Boyd said, his voice booming over her screams. You are not going to a VIP suite. You are not going to a rehab resort. You are going to Rikers Island. And from there, the federal marshals will transport you to face the conspiracy charges. Your career as an influencer is over. Your career as inmate number 9,473 is just beginning. Judge Boyd slammed the gavel down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Take them both away. But as the agents began to drag a screaming Lexi and a silent, defeated Blackwood toward the holding cells, Judge Boyd raised a hand. Wait one moment. The agents paused. Lexi looked back, mascara running down her face, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Did the judge change his mind? Was he going to offer a deal? Judge Boyd reached under his bench and pulled out a plain, white envelope. Miss Sterling, before you go, there is one final thing. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to write a check to fix everything. Well, the court has seized your assets, but there is one asset you forgot about, the one you created yourself. Judge Boyd held up the envelope. Do you know what this is? This, Judge Boyd said, sliding the content of the envelope onto his desk, is a cashier's check in the amount of $142,000. Lexi stopped struggling for a moment, her eyes locking onto the check. That's from my agency. That's my brand deal money? You can't take that. Judge Boyd shook his head slowly, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Not exactly. You see, Miss Sterling, when you live-streamed your arrest and the assault on Mr. Miller, you thought you were creating content. You thought you were entertaining your fans. And you were right. The video went viral. It has 40 million views. But, Judge Boyd continued, holding up a court order under the Son of Sam laws and state forfeiture statutes, a criminal is not permitted to profit from the publicity of their crime. I signed an emergency order this morning seizing all ad revenue and monetization generated by your social media accounts over the last 48 hours. The judge picked up the check and extended it toward Arthur Miller. You wanted to buy his diner, Miss Sterling? Well, in a twist of poetic justice that I rarely see, you just did. Or at least, you paid for the renovations. Judge Boyd looked at the veteran. Mr. Miller, this check is now yours. It represents the content this young woman squeezed out of your humiliation. I suggest you take it as a down payment on the damages she caused. Arthur Miller looked at the check. His hands, rough and calloused from years of hard work, trembled slightly as he took it. He looked at Lexi, who was watching her influencer earnings money she likely intended to use for her commissary fund disappear into the pocket of the man she called a peasant. I'm not keeping this, Arthur said, his voice firm. The diner has insurance. I'm going to use this to start a scholarship fund for students like Mateo. We'll call it the Sterling Grant. That way, every time someone asks where the money came from, we can tell them the story of the girl who tried to break us and failed. Lexi let out a guttural scream of frustration. I hate you. I hate all of you. My father will buy this whole city and burn it down. Your father, Judge Boyd said, signaling the agents to finally remove her, will be lucky if he can buy a pack of cigarettes in federal prison. Get her out of my sight. The agents didn't be gentle this time. They dragged the kicking and screaming heiress out the back doors. Her lawyer, Marcus Blackwood, followed in cuffs, his head hung low, knowing his career as the fixer for the elite was over. As the heavy doors slammed shut, silencing Lexi's tantrums, the courtroom let out a collective breath. It felt like the air had been purified. Arthur Miller looked up at the bench. Thank you, Your Honor. I didn't think this would happen. I thought guys like me didn't stand a chance against people like them. Judge Boyd finally closed the file on his desk. His expression softened, just for a moment. Mr. Miller, in this room, there are no billionaires and no dishwashers. There are only the guilty and the innocent. And today, the system worked. He looked at Mateo. Lance Corporal, dismissed. Go finish your degree. And if anyone bothers you again, you know where I am. Mateo saluted. It wasn't a military requirement in a civilian court, but it was a gesture of profound respect. As the victims left the courtroom, walking out with their heads held high, Judge Boyd sat back in his chair. The docket was cleared. The princess of the city was in a holding cell. The corrupt lawyer was indicted. Justice had been served cold and hard, but Judge Boyd knew the story wasn't completely over. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. It's done, Boyd said into the receiver. We have Lexi and the lawyer. But Richard Sterling, the FBI raided his house. But did they check the basement safe? The daughter mentioned a Project Horizon ledger in her texts. If that ledger exists, it doesn't just implicate the Sterlings. It brings down half the city council. Judge Boyd listened for a moment, his eyes narrowing. Good. Because I have a feeling Miss Sterling isn't going to last long in Rikers Island without her comforts. She's going to want to cut a deal. And when she starts talking, I want to be the one listening. He hung up the phone. The screen faded to black, but a new text appeared on the screen. SIX months later. The scene shifted. It wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a sterile, gray interview room inside a maximum security federal facility. Lexi Sterling was sitting at a metal table. The Versace dress was gone, replaced by a baggy orange jumpsuit. Her hair was unwashed, her roots showing. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. The door opened. Judge Boyd walked in, not in his robe, but in a suit. He sat down opposite her. Hello, Lexi, he said calmly. I heard you have something to tell me about Project Horizon. Lexi Sterling stared at Judge Boyd. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room hummed, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. She picked at a loose thread on her orange jumpsuit. Her fingernails, once manicured to perfection, now bitten down to the quick. You're not here to check on my rehabilitation, are you? Lexi asked, her voice raspy. You're here because you hit a wall. My father's lawyers are stonewalling the FBI. They can't find the money. Judge Boyd didn't blink. He placed a single file folder on the metal table. You're half right. We have traced the shell companies, Lexi. We know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. But you're right about one thing. We haven't found the Project Horizon ledger, the physical record of who was paid off, when, and for what favors. And you think I have it? Lexi let out a dry, humorless laugh. I was just the face. Remember? I was the distraction. Daddy's little influencer. That's exactly what your father is saying, Judge Boyd said, sliding the folder across the table toward her. In fact, that is his entire defense strategy. Lexi hesitated, then opened the folder. Inside was a transcript of a deposition given by Richard Sterling just 24 hours ago. Judge Boyd pointed to a highlighted paragraph. Read it. Lexi's eyes scanned the page. Her breath hitched. My daughter, the transcript read, quoting Richard Sterling, has always been unstable. She created these accounts without my knowledge. She was obsessed with the lifestyle. I had no idea she was moving money through the company to fund her brand. If crimes were committed, They were the actions of a rogue, entitled child. I am a victim of her greed. Lexi read it again and again. Her hands started to tremble, crinkling the paper. He blamed me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I signed those papers because he told me to. I moved that money because he said it was for tax optimization. He told me he would protect me. He is protecting himself, Lexi, Judge Boyd said coldly. He is offering you up as a sacrifice. He's painting you as the mastermind so he can plead ignorance and walk away with a slap on the wrist. He's going to let you rot in federal prison for 20 years while he retires to a non-extradition country. Tears welled up in Lexi's eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. The realization hit her harder than the judge's gavel ever could. The man whose approval she had chased her entire life, whose money she had flaunted as a shield, viewed her as nothing more than a disposable asset. She looked up at Judge Boyd. The fear was gone. In its place was a look of cold determination that mirrored the judge's own expression. You want the ledger, Lexi stated flatly. I want justice, Judge Boyd corrected. If you give us the ledger, I can speak to the U.S. attorney. We can talk about a plea deal. We can talk about witness protection. But I need the book, Lexi. Where is it? Lexi leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. It's not a book, and it's not in a safe. My father is paranoid, but he's also arrogant. He likes to keep his trophies close. She opened her eyes. Do you remember the car? The Rolls-Royce Phantom I drove to court that day? The FBI seized it, Boyd replied. They tore it apart. They checked the panels, the upholstery, the engine block. It's clean. They looked for a hidden compartment, Lexi said, a ghost of a smile appearing. They looked for something physical. But my father, he loves technology, almost as much as he loves money. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. The car's infotainment system. It's custom built. It looks like a standard interface. But if you go to the GPS navigation and enter a specific set of coordinates, the location of his first factory, it unlocks a secondary drive. The ledger isn't paper, Judge. It's a terabyte of encrypted data hardwired into the car's computer. Every bribe, every blackmail video, every dirty transaction for the last 15 years. It's all there, sitting in the impound lot. Judge Boyd stared at her, assessing the information. It was brilliant. A moving vault that looked like a luxury toy. Why are you telling me this? Boyd asked. You know this destroys him. It destroys the Sterling name forever. Lexi looked down at her orange jumpsuit. The Sterling name is already destroyed. I'm just finishing the job. He wanted to make me the villain? Fine. I'll be the villain that burns his kingdom down. Judge Boyd stood up. He tapped on the door for the guard. Thank you, Lexi. You just bought yourself a future. Boyd walked out of the room, pulling his phone from his pocket before the heavy steel door even clicked shut. He dialed the lead FBI agent. Don't sell the Rolls-Royce at auction, Boyd commanded, walking briskly down the prison corridor. Get a cyber forensics team to the impound lot. Now, we found the ghost. 1 hour later, the scene shifted to the FBI impound lot. Technicians were huddled inside the cabin of the seized Rolls-Royce Phantom, laptops connected to the dashboard with a mess of cables. Judge Boyd stood outside, watching through the glass. The lead agent gave him a thumbs up. The screen on the laptop was cascading with green text. Files were opening, names were appearing. We're in, the agent said, his voice filled with awe. It's all here. Judges, senators, police captains. This is a nuclear bomb, Your Honor. Judge Boyd nodded. Print it all. We have a lot of warrants to write. But as the files downloaded, a specific folder caught the agent's eye. It was labeled Insurance, LEXI. Your Honor, the agent called out. You need to see this. There's a folder here dedicated to his daughter. Judge Boyd leaned in. The agent opened the file. It wasn't financial data. It was a collection of videos, surveillance footage from inside the Sterling mansion. Boyd watched the first clip. It showed Richard Sterling sitting in his office, laughing with an associate. The audio was crystal clear. The girl is an idiot, Richard Sterling said on the recording. I put the accounts in her name because she'll sign anything I put in front of her. If the feds ever come sniffing, she's the perfect patsy. She's too stupid to realize she's the fall guy. Judge Boyd felt a rare surge of anger. Lexi was entitled, yes. She was cruel, yes. But she had been groomed to be a scapegoat by her own father since she was a teenager. Save that clip, Boyd ordered. I want to play that for Mr. Sterling when we arraign him. Suddenly, the agent's radio crackled to life. Dispatch to Team 1. We have a situation at the Sterling holding cell. Repeat. We have a situation. Judge Boyd's head snapped up. What kind of situation? The voice on the radio was frantic. Suspect Richard Sterling has. He's making a demand. He says he knows the car is being accessed. He says there's a fail-safe. A fail-safe? Boyd grabbed the radio. What are you talking about? He says if the data is decrypted without his biometric key, it triggers a remote wipe. He says he's the only one who can stop it, but he wants a deal. Immediate release, or the evidence vanishes in 60 seconds. The technician inside the car shouted, Judge, the screen, it's turning red. A countdown just started. Judge Boyd looked at the dashboard. System purge in 059, 058. They had the smoking gun, but it was dissolving in their hands. Ling Dan Shurfen, Ling Dan Ling Jofen, Ling Dan Ling Bafen. The red numbers on the dashboard of the Rolls-Royce counted down with terrifying speed. The FBI technician's hands hovered over the keyboard, sweat dripping onto the leather console. Judge, the technician yelled, he's not bluffing. The code is rewriting itself. We have to cut a deal or we lose everything. Over the speakerphone, Richard Sterling's voice was frantic, bordering on manic. 5 seconds. Boyd, tell them to open my cell door, or the Project Horizon ledger disappears forever. You have no case without that data. Let me go. Judge Boyd stared at the screen. He looked at the chaos of the code, the flashing red warning lights, and then he thought about the man on the other end of the line, a man who had built an empire on leverage, a man who kept recordings of his own daughter just to use her as a scapegoat, a man whose entire existence was defined by control. Don't do it, Judge Boyd said calmly to the agent holding the radio. Don't open the cell. Are you insane? The agent screamed. 3 seconds. I said hold, Boyd commanded, his voice shaking the glass of the observation booth. A narcissist never destroys his own leverage. He needs that data more than we do. Ling Dan Ling Ethan, Ling Dan. The screen inside the Rolls-Royce went black. The hum of the computer fans died down. The technician slumped back in the seat, defeated. It's gone, the technician whispered. He wiped it. Silence hung heavy in the impound lot. On the radio, Richard Sterling started laughing, a desperate, triumphant cackle. You lose, Boyd! You lose! I told you! Now I walk! But then, a single line of green text appeared in the center of the black screen. System reboot initiated. Archive mode. Locked. Enter passkey. Location, Factory 1. Judge Boyd smiled. It was the coldest, most satisfied smile anyone had ever seen. He didn't program a delete function, Boyd said, watching the data stream back onto the screen. Now fully accessible. He programmed a lockdown to scare us into releasing him. He couldn't bring himself to destroy the only thing that made him powerful. He bluffed. And he blinked. Boyd leaned into the radio microphone. Mr. Sterling, this is Judge Boyd. The data is secure. The bluff failed, and I suggest you get comfortable in that cell. You're going to be there for a very long time. The laughter on the other end turned into a scream of pure, primal rage before the agent cut the connection. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken. News cameras lined the back wall. This wasn't just a sentencing. It was the funeral of the Sterling Empire. Richard Sterling sat at the defense table, shackled at the waist and ankles. He looked 20 years older. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by prison gray. He refused to look at the gallery, he refused to look at the judge, and he refused to look at his daughter. Lexi Sterling sat a few feet away, also in handcuffs. She looked tired, but for the first time, her chin was up. She wasn't chewing gum. She wasn't checking a phone. She was staring straight ahead, ready to face the music. Judge Boyd entered. The room stood. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. We are here for the sentencing in the matter of the people versus Richard and Alexandra Sterling, Boyd announced. The evidence provided by the decrypted ledger found in the Rolls-Royce has led to the indictment of 3 city council members, 2 police captains, and a state senator. The corruption was deep, but the root has been pulled. He turned to Richard Sterling. Richard Sterling, you treated this city like your personal playground. You treated the law like a suggestion. And worst of all, you treated your own child like a disposable asset to shield you from your own crimes. You are a man devoid of honor, devoid of empathy, and now devoid of power. On the 42 counts of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy, this court sentences you to 150 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. You will die in prison, Mr. Sterling. And the only legacy you leave behind is a cautionary tale about greed. Richard Sterling didn't speak. He was dragged out of the courtroom, a broken old man, leaving behind a silence that felt like victory. Judge Boyd then turned to Lexi. Alexandra Sterling, you stand before me convicted of assault, destruction of property, and conspiracy. You were arrogant. You were cruel. You hurt Mr. Miller and Mr. Rodriguez. You laughed at this court. Lexi nodded, tears falling silently. I know, Your Honor. I deserve whatever you give me. However, Boyd continued, you also did something your father never could. You told the truth. You gave us the key to the car. You testified against the man who controlled you. You broke the cycle. The federal prosecutors have recommended leniency due to your substantial cooperation, but my court still demands payment for the harm you caused to the victims in this room. I am sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison, Boyd declared, but I am suspending 2 of those years pending successful completion of a rehabilitation program. You will serve 3 years. When you get out, you will have nothing. No trust fund, no mansion, no followers. Judge Boyd leaned forward, his voice softening just a fraction. But you will have something money can't buy, Lexi. You will have a clean slate. You stripped away the Sterling name, and now you have the chance to build a name that actually means something. Do not waste it. Lexi closed her eyes and exhaled. 3 years was a long time, but compared to the life of lies she had been living, it felt like freedom. Thank you, Your Honor, she whispered. As the bailiffs led her away, she paused. She looked toward the back of the room. Arthur Miller and Mateo Rodriguez were sitting there. Lexi stopped. Mr. Miller, Mateo, she choked out. I really am sorry. Arthur Miller, the veteran with the patch over his eye, looked at the young woman who had mocked him. He didn't smile, but he nodded slowly, a soldier acknowledging a ceasefire. Do your time, kid, Arthur said gruffly. Do your time and come out better. The doors closed. The Sterlings were gone. Judge Boyd sat alone on the bench for a moment as the courtroom cleared. He picked up the heavy file labeled Sterling and dropped it into the closed bin. The thud echoed in the empty room. He looked directly into the camera, breaking the fourth wall for the final time. They always think they're untouchable, Judge Boyd said, his voice low and final. They think money is a shield. They think power is a weapon. But in this room, the only currency that matters is the truth. And sooner or later, everyone pays the bill. Court is adjourned. Judge Boyd banged the gavel. The screen faded to black.